It's the SDG Podcast. Before we get started, you can check us out on the web at solutiondesign.com/podcast or find us on all the social medias, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Solution Design Group.
Yay.
Hey, everybody. Why don't we go around the horn, introduce ourselves?
Hi, I'm Elster Hura.
I'm Peter Lawrence.
I'm Kyle Bacher, and today with us we have Jim Rathe, which I know how to pronounce now after working with you for several years and pronouncing it wrong. It's Rathe. Jim is one of our project delivery people, and he's been doing project management and that kind of stuff forever. And so I wanted him to be here to help us talk about organizational change management. Now, it's not change control, like a committee that has to meet every time you move a box or change a link. It's how do you get people to do new things or to change the way they're currently doing things? So, Jim, if you can just answer that quickly, then we can be done.
If I could answer that quickly, this would be the shortest podcast you've ever done.
Yeah. So what kind of change management stuff have you done in the past, however many years you've been doing this?
So a better answer to that would be is the number of projects that I've done in the last 20 plus years, because it is part of every single one. So I don't know that there's really a metric that I could give you outside of that.
Okay. Of all of those projects, how many times has it been like a consideration to be done deliberately? Like it's part of the plan. There's a team, there's an initiative behind it. And it's not just something that's organic that you know is going to happen, but something they call out and actually try to pull off.
Yeah, it is. While it has become more prominent as time has progressed, where organizations have invested in a team focused specifically on change management. In recent years, I would say there's more of an emphasis there. I would say it's still those that have taken an active, proactive approach to investing in the change management resources to get things accomplished, to put staff embedded with the project teams that are doing the actual work to focus on change management and communication. Those that actually take that type of an effort within the projects, I can count on one hand. It is a very small percentage in the large number of projects that I've been involved with. And I don't fault leaders for not taking that. I mean, there's a lot of economic changes, as if you look back over 20 years on how, projects come to be, how they get funded, what the business really needs to accomplish, the time frame because of the urgency of the need of the work that has to be done that impact that. And so I don't fault them for not engaging or investing more in having a team focus on those change management aspects. But whether they engage them or not, change management is a part of every project. Unfortunately, in some projects, it's much more, there's a more prominent need for it. And it's usually, and that can determine the success of the project as well.
So counting on one hand, sort of the number of projects that have really taken hold and said, we're going to make organizational change, or we're going to focus this part of this project is to do the change, right? In a lot of the other cases, it's like, well, as part of this project, things are going to have to change. We're going to have to change how we process accounting or how we do something else, right? Do you find like a number of projects come in with sort of a stealth change built into them? Like, we're going to secretly change how we do this process by creating software to do this process differently, and we'd like you to manage that. Do you find that to be sort of part of the deal?
It is part of the deal. So when I think about the work that that we get brought in to do from a project leadership, project management, program management, portfolio management, engagement management, whatever title you want to put to it, and you throw Scrum Masters in that mix as well. I mean, we all are, one aspect of change is going to fall within our bailiwick. And it's because of how organizations have compressed some of those roles. In that capacity, Peter, they've shifted some of that to being, they might call it out. They look at it from a project perspective, saying, well, if we engage our communications team, that's quote unquote change management, because we're communicating what the changes are. However, if we were to look at the vast array of projects that we get involved with, whether it be a technology implementation where they're going from hosted to cloud servers on AWS or what have you, or they're moving their document management system from one system to SharePoint or some other technology, or whether it be a digital transformation or a shift in their methodology that they implement technology with, you going from like a waterfall to maturing their agile practice. Whatever the case might be, there are going to be changes, and where I see most organizations lack is they don't spend enough time really evaluating and breaking down what is that current state. Meaning, what are those current business processes that are used, and by implementing technology or by making this change, how are people going to have to interact differently? That is probably starting at the root cause of where change starts. That's probably the singular most important area that I see get overlooked. They don't want to spend the time identifying what that current process is, and they don't have their current state really extremely well documented.
They know what they do, and they do it every day.
Yep.
So yeah, forget that there's 13 steps that they forget about every single time when they do the project or something like that, right?
I mean, I also think about in many of us, there can be this like grass is greener mentality too, where it's just like, oh, it's good. There's going to be a new project. Okay, cool. Let's change everything, because whatever isn't what we're doing right now is going to be better. And so I think, Jim, you brought up, understanding the current state is so important, because it helps, at least in my head, it helps me kind of understand, okay, why do we need to do this change? Is it just because, one person wants something different? Is it just because we all are tired of same old and want the fresh new hotness? Or is there a genuine, improvement or new functionality that's needed?
Yeah, and you talk about all the motivations for implementing a lot of these technologies, and those motivations in an organization are vast, right? I mean, it could be improving their revenue streams, increasing performance, reducing costs, reducing risk, improving I mean, a whole host of those, and they're all well intentioned. Mm-hmm. Right. But when you look at it from a team, and all of us have been on different teams that have been implementing any of these, how often is it that we ask, why are we actually doing this? And nobody can really give us a straight answer. And to your point, they haven't really spent the time to identify what is our current state, so that as we go through this transition, there's going to be a transitionary state of how the team works. How do we work together? How do we figure out where we need to go to? And then what does that future look like? Because at an executive level, most of these organizations have received, in the selling process of whatever project they're going through, have received some documentation that has said, by doing X, you're going to improve or grow by Y.
Right.
We all know it. They've all done it.
Oh, yeah. Why are you changing it? Because if we bring in this tool, we can sunset these 8 other things that cost all this money that are old. And then you bring in the new tool, and then you have that tool and all those other things that you now have to sunset. And that's kind of where the real work begins.
Now you have 9 tools
migrations
that you support
and
for a while.
yeah. What I've seen happen is things that work toward change management, things that help change management happening, because it's been difficult to get people to use new systems and to transition and things like that. Part of those core issues are being addressed. You've got user experience design, the people doing research and interviews and figuring out how people do stuff. And QA used to be something that was kind of an afterthought. And now I think more companies are taking QA more seriously and doing that. So a lot of those obstacles, there's things that will like stop change in its tracks. And number one is technical issues with a new system, things like that. So just the way the industry has changed to make those types of improvements and user experience improvements, it's like it has to be better. Or you have to convince people to get through a period of time when it's not, but will be. And that's kind of where learning curve happens. And that's a trick.
So with that, like there is that transition period. There is going to be a time when you need to get buy-in and facility with a new tool, a new application, a new process, a new something. What are some of the levers that you can pull to help make that transition easier? Like, is it, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question, Al. And there's, and I'm going to, kind of give you three aspects that I think are all different viable aspects as it relates to that. And the first one is speed of adoption. So how quickly can the individuals make the change? I think that's one of the first ones. The second one is the ultimate utilization, which is how many individuals can make the change. And the third one is proficiently. So how effective were the individuals to getting to that future state? All three of those factors are going to determine the speed, the success, and how quickly the ROI of the project is going to be realized. Mm-hmm. Now, what are some of those different levers? I mean, I think early on, as you start a project and you start identifying what are some of those changes that are going to have to occur, who's going to be impacted by it, how are we going to train the people if training is necessary, or is it just communication? All along the way, the earlier that those aspects are identified, the better it's going to be. And I give an example is there was a large organization that I was working with recently that was implementing a technology that would allow their customers to make payments online. And their customer base is individuals, and their customer base are very large companies. So you have a very broad spectrum. You also have a broad spectrum of those that may or may not be more technology savvy on the individual side. Some are more reluctant to leverage it, which means they're less apt to use technology to make the payment. On the same token, on the corporate side, some of them would rather just wire transfer because of the dollar amount that they're going to be transferring. So when you look at that full spectrum, the reason why the organization was moving towards this technology was, number one, to be able to reduce the length of time that their accounts receivables were out there. They can collect funds faster. Makes obvious sense. There's more money in the bank quicker. And so as we were working on this project, we set what I thought were measurable goals.
Sure.
Now, again, looking at figuring that from the time that we were able to begin to roll this out to customers, that our goal was in each one of these individual groups of about X number, give or take 100,000 customers, we wanted to be able to achieve a 20%, 10 to 20%, again, small number, achievable, of adoption rate. We did hit the 20%, but what we also uncovered along the way is that the customer data was not actually clean. And so we uncovered some other challenges because of other technologies in the organization. They didn't have all the individual data points that they needed on some of their customers to be able to effectively communicate the new opportunity to them. So, which forced us to shift our rollout strategy to not just deal with their support for those that could or couldn't log in or their passwords has expired, but also their customer advocates that actually communicate with the customers directly, of gathering that information, letting them know this is available, and then taking it a step further with their sales team. So as they sell new customers, to be able to communicate that information and gather the correct information from them. So what we thought was going to be able to be rolled out 100% within a 6-month time frame turned out that we're not going to be able to achieve that 100% even rollout inside of, give or take, 16 to 18 months.
Right. It really dramatically changed the project, right? From what you initially started to do. I mean, the technology was probably perfectly done, right? And ready to go. And it was the business change that needed to take place that really took an amount of time that I'm guessing a majority of the people involved in the project were not expecting, right?
Yep.
The client's like, oh yeah, we'll get 20% easy. This will be like, fish in a barrel kind of thing, right?
I think also one of the things that's happened in the industry that's promoted like positive change, made it a little bit easier, is just kind of the IT philosophy. It used to be the ivory tower. We're going to hand down these updates, upgrades, new systems.
That's what IT stands for.
We're deciding this in a bubble, and all these changes became, or were looked at as something IT did to us, not for us.
Right.
Now they're making us do that. If I had $1 for every time I heard that, now they're making us do this. They're making us do that. Well, now I think there's more of a business driven IT, working in service to the business and involving the business as early as possible. If you get those internal champions and people that were involved in the process, they will fight for the change. They've been part of it. They'll be advocates for it.
And I think about, what the project, Jim, that you just talked about, that how much, at least in my head, I don't think it would be nearly as successful if it was an issue of, well, the business has figured out how we're going to capture things, but the actual development time is going to take 16 to 18 months instead of 6 to 12. Like the fact that, IT was ready to go so that then the business had more time to examine, okay, what are some of the constraints we're running up against? How do we need to reevaluate the rollout? That means it is a lot more successful, because you are focusing on the people, on the actual business case, and IT's enabling that as opposed to making it slower or harder to roll out.
I credit that to their leadership, because they were in continual communication on the project, both on the business and on the IT side. Nice. There was alignment, in the key groups, which I think that did help that matter out. There are obviously other risks that are involved and other challenges, as there are in every project. But,
yep.
But I think, all things considered, is, thinking about that use case in particular, we were able to maximize what we could, and we minimized, the areas that we couldn't have an impact on. And we tried to figure out what is another way that we can achieve the result that we're going after. Kyle, you mentioned something that I thought I would surface to shift slightly, and that is some of the impacts of change aren't always driven by IT. Sometimes they're driven by a process change, meaning there's been a merger of two companies together, and both of these companies use different processes. And so, how do we get the teams aligned? That is another aspect of change that may not be technology related.
Yeah.
And you could also, job roles within companies. I know we've seen that in different companies. I know we've had some recent promotions even at SDG. And, that also brings on change. What are the new roles and how does that shift? How are we going to change?
Any of those shakeups? I worked in a former life doing tech support for a company that was in acquisition mode and gobbling up smaller companies that did what we did, not SDG, but what they did, and then trying to shift them to use the big playbook to operate. That was so tough because it's such a shakeup.
Well, and that's where you hear a lot of, they're forcing me to do this now.
Yep. And that stuff's going to happen, but I think that there's such a thing as organizational empathy. And if you have that, you're really keyed in on, how people feel about things. And that kind of makes you look at, what are ways we can alleviate the pain. Because, sometimes it's little subtle things that you don't even think of, or you make assumptions that, well, this is easier than the old way, but, this takes 3 steps and you only have to do this and you're done. And it's like, well, there's that person in the corner that isn't great with technology, but has done this for years and knows how to do it the old way.
Right.
Even though it's 20 steps, they know how to make that progress to get it done. And then you're bringing in something different. And then when they, turn up their nose at it or complain or make a face, you feel confused and hurt by that. It's like, no, you don't understand. They don't like technology. They're not great with technology. They're not about technology.
This dramatic change to your job is going to be so much easier eventually once you learn how to do it.
I know how to do it.
You actually you brought up another customer that I worked with years ago in the fitness industry, and they serviced a lot of fitness equipment. And they installed new, yes. They did all that. It was a full scale, large scale organization, but their service department operated, and you'd think of having 10 to 12 technicians out working on equipment and doing maintenance on all the equipment, that using GPS and those technologies would be, we in technology would think this is a no-brainer. But they had their dispatchers, their communications through their cell phone, and at that time pagers were still a thing,
right?
And their technicians, believe it or not, they actually used a board to track who was going where when. And they literally had a card system on the wall. I spent some time with them to identify where we could, impact and improvements within the organization. Believe it or not, that was actually the bottom of the list because of how well their team was able to use that system to keep the efficiency of their service people going from place to place, both in mileage and in time. So that was actually bottom of the list when we looked at all the opportunities to improve the organization.
And when you walk in, it probably looks like the top of the list, right?
That is exactly the case. And, that's why I mentioned kind of understanding what that current state is. When you understand that current state, you also get that picture of looking at the current state processes and what they are and seeing where the greatest amount of improvement can come from.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, a board with cards on it and everything else, or even, a simple Kanban board, right?
Yeah.
With just cards moving on it sometimes is more efficient than training how to use the latest software to do exactly the same thing. We've all been trained how to write on paper and move cards, right? So
Well,
so it just kind of changes things.
that's a good point too, is, introducing technology to replace something that's not on a screen. You always assume that, hey, we're going to bring this into the digital age and it's going to be way better. And, I worked on a project where there was it was, I guess, stumbling, I would call it. It was not doing well. And so I met with the PM and I'm like, we need to get in a room every morning. We need to have everything on a wall so everybody knows where we're at, how much progress we're making, how close we're getting to that deadline. I said, because we don't have that group understanding, so people are off doing their thing. Once we did that, that was pieces of paper taped to a wall, and everything just turned around because now we're all on the same page. Now we have a shared mission. Now we're all seeing it. If we had said, go to this spreadsheet and look at that, this will show you this stuff. And no, it was like we needed to capture those people, drag them into a room and put this right in front of them. It's how do you understand like when to do something like that? Or not to change something like that call board or that thing on the wall that says somebody's out to lunch and will be back at 1 p.m.
Because that's totally something that we've talked about in the past in terms of like building trust, for example, at a client. That especially as consultants, one of the worst things you can do is to come in and on day one have a list of things you're going to change. Like you don't know yet. You need to understand what are the idiosyncrasies of this particular client. What are the things that the teams love? What are the things that the teams hate doing but maybe don't want to change? That you need to take that time to understand the problem before you decide that you have all the solutions and why didn't we start yesterday?
You're absolutely right, Elle, and that's that being conscious to keep our own assumptions of what we see and or have those assumptions, but go through the process of validating, are they legitimate or not? What I've observed over time, and I think many of you guys also have, is that we do it. We naturally, as individuals, we make those assumptions and we have those biases, but we don't voice them. The longer we've been in consulting, the better we are at validating. Is this legitimate or is it not? What am I seeing? Is this the case? And that validation is what allows us, I believe, is one of the aspects that allows us to build trust with our customers, to know that we do truly have their best interest in mind.
So I'm wondering, Peter, as a developer, as an architect, I would imagine there are times when you're brought into a client by yourself and you're noticing that there are some processes that need to be changed, some new tech that needs to be adopted. And how do you decide, if you had the power and the client had, just money falling out of their pockets,
infinite money and infinite time?
Exactly. Yeah. This realistic scenario. How do you decide when it would be a good time to bring in a Jim? To have someone who's really focusing on that higher level project management, alignment, strategy, that kind of work.
Well, yeah, and like especially because, I mean, in the consulting industry or business or whatever you want to call it, we're always looking at sort of low-hanging fruit, right? Like, oh, I see that you're using source control from 1974. We might want to update that and move a little bit forward. Maybe not jump to the cloud necessarily, but push forward or something like that. Obviously that's pretty low hanging fruit, but there's sometimes where you can just look around and you say, okay, the processes here are such that they don't even know what they are. They're just stuck. Like they want to replace everything, and they have a lot of money to replace everything, but they have no idea where to start, or even what's what the point is, right?
Yeah, they know things are old and things could be better. Like the world has changed, technology, applications, it's all gotten way, way better, and we're still on this old stuff. So now we need to move. Or
everybody's walking around with a computer in their pocket now,
yeah,
and they weren't before, right? And so now, do we take advantage of that? Is now the time or not? And so that's a great time to talk to Jim.
That's where understanding, as a consultant coming in from the outside, digging in and understanding as much as you possibly can about like how people operate, how they interact with the systems, how they interact with other people, if it's part of a process. There's one of the things I learned in healthcare is you can have apps on a person's handheld device. You could roll out stuff on their phone, but say if a nurse is going in to talk to a patient and they pull out their phone, the assumption is they're texting, they're wasting time. And no, they may be looking at the chart on the phone or interacting with an important system, but it doesn't look like that. And so that creates a negative experience for the patient. Well, if you don't think of that, if you're just thinking in terms of the systems and wouldn't this be great, then you're going to have a miss. They're just going to say, we're not going to do it. I think that deep understanding is critical, and that means involving the people on the front lines and not coming in hot.
Another example of that, Kyle, is we have a lot of customers that are global, right? And a lot of organizations that operate in multiple countries and different regions around the globe. And given that, some of those organizations have operated independently for a long period of time, but corporate might be looking to try to see what is taking place in each one of these locations. And because they're not necessarily using the exact same systems, surfacing that data to really get a pulse of what is occurring within those organizations is a challenge. And so similarly to what you're describing, the intent is to consolidate some of what is going on within those companies. But on the same regard, those on the ground, they're trying to stay focused on their efficiency and the delivery and their customer, the same things that they've always done, not looking at it from a larger perspective to say, if I took this one extra step, I'm now able to provide this information to corporate to help them make better decisions longer term. So your point of from the patient all the way up through how they're serving the information on those charts is very similar as it would be in a manufacturing distribution situation for a global company. Because you're thinking about the guys on the ground that are, working on those supply lines.
Right.
In a similar vein, Jim, I think your job is potentially in a fairly unique position where you're able to collect information from like low level all the way up through the top. Have you had an experience where, let's say the lower level, more granular work, the people, boots on the ground, are wanting a change, but the leadership might not? And how do you go about persuading one or the other side?
I have, and each one is a little bit unique.
Sure.
One of the key drivers is being able to validate that the demand from boots on the ground is not just a very small pocket of individuals, but it's a larger representation. So that's usually number one, is just that validation. And how do you go about that? A second piece, it's always a contributing factor, is, what does the change that is being presented, what does that represent to the organization? And what does that represent to the customer? Does it allow them to be, what are the drivers? Are they going to be able to be more efficient? Is it that they're going to be able to do more with less? I mean, what are the values, right? And that could be as simple as a warehouse worker having a scanner to know exactly where to go in the warehouse to pick items to be shipped. Just thinking of a real simple example, right? But that also could be looked at, as in a lot of different viewpoints. If it's not communicated clearly through the proper channels, it could be just viewed as this individual just as a complainer.
Mm-hmm.
So, that information, how information is communicated, is just as important as the information that it is.
I think if you look at, asking people to tell you how they're interacting, what they're doing, you can miss out, and they might not be communicating it clearly. There might be things they're just missing because they're so natural to what they're doing. I think observing like how people are actually interacting with things is critical. Being in the trenches, seeing what's going on for yourself, or having people that do that and do that research. I worked doing tech support many years ago, and our warehouse kept burning up the Citrix computers they were using. They kept failing. And we tried patching and all the stuff we could do through the network and with the vendor, and having them ship systems back and looking at stuff. And then I said, well, I've had it. And I went out to the warehouse and I walked in, and the lights were flickering, dimming. The power fluctuations in that building were all over the place. So I went and got power cleaners for each one, and we had never lost one again. If I hadn't gone in there and seen that, because those people work there every day and they might complain about the lights, but it's not something they're going to tell you about because you're focused on that system.
That's not going to hurt the PCs.
Yeah. But I think observing, understanding how people, and including everybody. If you leave out a group that only uses this thing 5% of the time, but that 5% is critical to their role, and they only use a small part of this system, how do you make sure you got everybody accounted for? And so that you're not making a negative change. And that's not easy. I think you rely on the business for a lot of that, because you're not going to have the whole company in a room together telling you stuff. You're going to be connected with key people, and then you have to have them connect you to key people.
Unless it's a very small company.
Yes. All right. There's 5 of you. I think we got this. But a lot of times taking them through that discovery process, you find out things that are astounding. No one group that's part of this process knows how the entire process works. I discovered that at an organization, and we figured out that there was a big chunk of it that didn't need to be there, that was causing them 40 labor hours a week. And or discovering that they want to replace the old system because people are working around it. And it's well, if they have this workaround and they're not using the old system and you replace it, are you going to replace the workaround? Or is that still going to be available? An ordering system that's in place and the customer is just emailing the reps. and they're not using the system, upgrading the ordering system, well, just shooting an email and having the rep do all the work is way easier for the customer. So they're not going to use the new system. Yeah, how do you deal with that? How do you deal with workarounds and introducing new stuff when the old stuff is still available? That's the problem we had in SharePoint. If we wanted to give people a new way to collaborate, but the file shares were still there. Yeah, when do you burn the ships?
Well, another example of that is, project that we were working on was, a large organization, several 100,000 employees globally. If you think about an organization that size, you're going to have some element of turnover. And so when you think about the onboarding process, there's information that is just standard that you need, from getting your email set up, getting your laptop, and, all those standard things that most of us have gone through, including all your HR, how do you record time, et cetera, right?
Right.
And so when you think about that process in its entirety, and you realize that across a 12-month time frame, you're going to have to onboard 3,000 people, 1% of 300,000, that's a large number. So how do you take within technology, within each of the business units, including HR, et cetera, and an organization that has grown by acquisition, grown by organic, over time, it has different regions around the globe that isn't necessarily using one system of delivery for all that information. Some of that information might be in SharePoint, some of that information might be in OneDrive, some of that information might be in another place. So now you've got PDFs and PowerPoints, and you've got all this information all over. How do you go about streamlining how you onboard a new employee, and then not just in general, but how do you elevate their skill sets within that first 12 months so that you can ideally retain a higher percentage of those? Because your onboarding success ultimately is determined by how well you onboard them and how well they like their job, right?
Right.
Do they feel valued? All the other HR things. So that was a project that, because of the organizational size, they had multiple systems. And so how do you bring that information together? It was not inherently set out. They did not set out to have multiple systems doing the same thing, but it was a victim of circumstance until they realized it over time. So then it became an initiative. And so the first aspect, thinking about change management 101 from, process mentality, which is awareness. How do we create awareness that we need to change? And then as we look at that, do each of the business leaders recognize that there is a desire to change? Meaning, do they realize the impact of it? And that's where you help educate them and provide knowledge, right? Knowledge of what the change would mean into the future, knowledge of what we currently do and what that's going to look like. And then as you look at those, the fourth aspect is, do we have the ability to change? Are there contracts in place with some of these technologies that we can't end of life them or consolidate them? And then lastly is reinforcement. How are we improving? How are we reinforcing that, hey, this technology is there, leverage it? And so when you think about, it's a standard ADKAR, ADKAR, which is a common change management acronym, because people change, organizations don't, and then people actually ultimately end up changing the organization. That's how change takes place, right? But if you take that learning management piece and you put that into practice and you think about that use case that I just walked through, take that from a onboarding perspective and then take that to the larger organization of individuals that have gone through that less than subpar experience over time, trying to elevate their skill sets.
Sure.
So what does ADKAR mean? Because I haven't heard that before. So
ADKAR is within change management. It's an acronym. So it's awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. They're really kind of 4 steps of going through the process of change, of how we as individuals go through that process.
So if let's say we're following ADKAR to the best of our ability, is it still possible to fail? Or what does not success look like?
You can always fail, but the idea is behind somebody who at least recognizes it, that awareness and that recognition, early stages of a project or at any stage of a project, recognizing that there is change that is going to have to occur as part of the project. That's that awareness piece. If you recognize it, now there are naturally going to be actions that you and or somebody else potentially on the team can take to reduce those risk and or the mitigations that could be result of not doing a good job, right?
Well, and even
And I would
required
imagine,
to take, right?
yeah, or just seeing that, okay, maybe our initial understanding of the change or the issue to solve was wrong, but that doesn't mean the whole endeavor is unsuccessful.
Correct. And that awareness, that recognition, because we all make assumptions when we start out on a project and we create a change. Even if there's a change management plan created, the best change management people will also recognize this, is that we might set out with the best plan in place and the best intentions, but as this project progresses over time, some of those assumptions could be incorrect. And so we have to reevaluate what were those assumptions that we made that started the project. Same thing from a fiscal perspective. Some of the assumptions of what we thought were going to be improvements and or realized benefits of this technology or this project may be different than what we initially thought they would be based upon the data. And so all of those aspects can change within the project, and being able to recognize that and potentially course correct, you can still have a project that succeeds but doesn't hit that full milestone of what was the desired future outcome initially. But you bring up
you never fail. You're just continuing to drive towards success.
And I think that's key to talk about. So thank you, Jim, for kind of going more into detail about that, because there can be a lot of fear or burden with, all right, this thing that I put my name on, that I promoted and pushed for months, it's finally happening. It better not fail, or else this was all for nothing, or like that. So the understanding that you can help be a part of a change, but also that you need to retain the flexibility to adjust, the path that you're on. That makes it a lot like a more successful project, but also makes it safer too, because then you're really not talking about the sort of binary, like it succeeded or it didn't. It's just, all right, let's keep tweaking and moving forward.
And Al, you bring up a really good point there that I guess I want to call out, and that is leadership dynamics of individuals are broad. So there are different personalities of leaders. There are some leaders that are, what I would consider to be a, kind of a critical parent type, to where it's everything is black and white. It's either success or failure, to the example that you brought up. And then there are leaders that really empower their people, to where I won't say that they're 100% hands off, but they empower their people to make decisions and to bring them information and to validate it, and to really lead their people, alongside them as they go through the learning process. And so they're very different leadership styles. And I've obviously worked around a variety of those, but that also dictates how the team is as well. A leader will provide leadership to that team, give them information, support them. Doesn't mean that there's not accountability, but their desire is that they don't want the team to feel like, I'm a failure on a constant ongoing basis, because that hampers that team's ability to be able to think outside the box and come up with some really good ideas that could even be aspects that they hadn't considered early in the project.
Yeah.
So, that mindset of how you create a team, those team dynamics, maybe that's a topic for a future podcast, but
we talked about that.
But that definitely, that dynamic from a leadership perspective, whether it's the leadership of a team, whether that's an executive leadership that's moving top down through management, that does play a significant factor in both positive change and negative change.
And having that communication in place, right? We're working towards success. We're not, failing until we hit success, right? You're always be failing. That's not really an industry term, right? So you're always moving towards success and getting closer every day, rather than just we're always failing until we hit that magic moment of success.
Or nothing's happening until we succeeded. Glad we didn't talk for 9 months. So yeah.
You talk about leadership and change and things like that. There's also a factor of influence that you have to consider. You might have leadership on board, you might have everybody on board, but there's a really influential person or group that is not. And
you mean like a resistor to change?
Like somebody that's not only resistant, but has influence on a lot of other people and will, I guess the best way I can
saboteur
say it
to
is,
change.
Don't underestimate the evil genius of your people, to work around things and, to get their stuff done. Like their goal is to do their job. They're going to do their job. And you might introduce something that they don't want to do because they think it's going to make it harder to do their job. Their intentions are awesome and admirable because they're driven. And so when they have their own version of your intranet in a spreadsheet on a shared drive, because it gives them what they need that they're not getting or they don't think they're getting, you have to account for that. I think understanding like who are the change makers and the influencers, and if you can get them on board early on, it's very helpful.
Kyle, I've actually seen organizations to where within the business they set up an entire shadow IT group within the business to go around the business to get work accomplished. So, I mean, you talk about the extreme of we're going circumventing a system. I think that's probably the extreme that I have seen.
Yes.
So, and to your point, yes, making sure that you identify early your different individuals that are going to be a part of that adoption, that change. You've got your early adopters that can sometimes be your advocates and can be your promoters through the organization because they do have influence. They embrace what is coming. And then you also have your later stage that they're going to get on board because, hey, I want to do the right thing. There's those that are like, hey, you know what? I'm a little skeptical, but if you prove it to me, I'm willing to get on board. And the fourth one is what I would consider your resistors or your late stage. And those are the ones that are going to come kicking and screaming, or in some cases, they may leave, they may retire, they may shift to a different role, or they may just embrace it and just move forward. I have seen all the above, but typically those are your common four your roles, if you would, of from an adoption perspective as it relates to change management. Kyle, you're absolutely right.
One of my favorite conversations I ever had started with me saying, I found the SharePoint server you have under your desk.
Did I forget to turn that off again? Dang it.
Yeah. Is it backed up? No. Yeah. All right. Well, we have a whole data center and we back things up and we take care of stuff so that you don't have to. So can we migrate your stuff and talk about, building your own environment? And okay. That's shadow IT. Yeah, I love it. I love that people will do they're like water. They will find every little way they can to do their job, to make their job easier for themselves to do. And, you got to commend them for that. But as an organization, it creates issues that they're maybe not aware of. And so you got to have those conversations.
Everything's just fine as long as that SharePoint server doesn't disappear or accidentally stop working, right?
And I know who they're going to call. Yeah. And I'm going to be like, what? What is that? I don't know anything about it. We don't have credentials. We have nothing. There's nothing I can do. All right. Well, thanks, Jim, for joining us.
Yeah.
And
Thank you,
helping
Jim.
us drive change within our podcast today.
My pleasure. Glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me, and it's always great to see each one of you and collaborate on work together.
I feel like
Awesome.
every podcast planning meeting, we should now just have AdCar up behind us. Just, all right, how are we doing?
Awesome. Well, with that, let's say goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Solution Design Group is a digital product consultancy in Minneapolis. Check us out on the web at solutiondesign.com or look for us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Solution Design Group.